2,000 years ago, a man said something so radical that empires tried to erase it. They failed. Tonight, as missiles tear through the Middle East sky, as 10 nations wake up to fire, as the world holds its breath on the edge of something nobody wants to name, that same idea is more urgent than it has ever been. What would he do right now? Not a politician, not a general, not a strategist with a targeting list. The man who had every reason to pick up a sword, who lived under occupation, who watched his people suffer, who was betrayed, tortured, and executed by the most powerful empire in the ancient world, and who chose in that final moment to forgive the people doing it to him. Stay with me, because what he would say about this war will make you question everything you think you know about strength. Before we talk about him, you need to understand what he would be looking at. February 28, 2026. American and Israeli missiles strike 3,000 targets across Iran in a single night. Iran's supreme leader is killed. Hundreds of missiles launch toward 10 nations. The Strait of Hormuz shuts down. Global markets crash. 1,700 people affected. Hundreds of thousands displaced. 3 nations, all rooted in the same Abrahamic faith, all claiming the same God, tearing each other apart. This is what he would walk into. And here is what most people completely misunderstand about him. He was not soft. He flipped tables in the most powerful religious institution of his era with his own hands. He looked Roman soldiers directly in the eye without flinching. He was publicly tortured and still refused to become what he was fighting against. That is not weakness. That is the most terrifying kind of strength that has ever existed. And that strength is exactly what the Middle East is missing right now. Let me tell you something that should stop you completely. He lived in the most politically explosive region on Earth. Roman occupation, tax collectors bleeding people dry, religious leaders selling out their own people, armed revolutionaries recruiting in every village, a people humiliated, exhausted, and desperate for someone to finally do something. Sound familiar?
In 2,000 years, with every military revolution ever written, nobody has produced a better answer than those
the
4
charisma,
words.
the anger of an occupied people behind him. He chose something harder. And here is the psychological truth nobody talks about. It is infinitely easier to hate than to understand. Revenge feels like justice. Retaliation feels like strength. The cycle feels like progress, but it never is. He saw that more clearly than anyone before or since. He once said something that has never stopped being true. Whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. Not to an enemy, not to acceptable collateral damage, to me, personally. Imagine a world leader who genuinely believed that, who looked at every displaced family in this war not as a number in a briefing, but as himself. Would 3,000 strikes in a single night still feel like victory? He also said something even harder. Blessed are the peacemakers. Not blessed are the powerful, not blessed are the victorious, not blessed are the ones with the most advanced weapons. The peacemakers. In 2,000 years, with every technological advancement, every military revolution, every geopolitical theory ever written, nobody has produced a better answer than those 4 words. We just keep refusing to try them. But why? Because peace is hard. Real peace, not the absence of war, but the presence of justice, is the hardest thing any human being has ever attempted. And he knew that. He was not naive. He did not believe kind words would make empires put down their swords. He understood power. He understood violence. He understood the system he was challenging would eventually come for him. It did. But here is what he understood that no military strategist in any 2026 war room seems to understand. Cycles of violence do not end. They only pause, and every pause is just the loading of the next round. Iran fires hundreds of missiles. A new supreme leader is installed, harder, colder, more determined than his father. The strikes aimed for regime change. They produced regime consolidation. The cycle tightened. It always tightens. He watched the same pattern in 1st century Judea. Rome crushed resistance. Resistance grew harder. Rome crushed harder, until finally Jerusalem was destroyed completely. The cycle always ends the same way. And so he offered the world a different mathematics entirely. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the only force that actually breaks the cycle. Seeing your enemy's humanity is not surrender. It is the beginning of the only peace that ever lasts. He demonstrated this personally, completely, at the highest possible cost. Now, here is the question that nobody in any war room is asking. On February 27th, just 24 hours before the bombs fell, Iran had agreed to reduce its nuclear stockpiles. The window was genuinely open. He spent his entire life keeping windows open, sitting with Romans, tax collectors, revolutionaries, people on every side of every conflict of his era. He never once said the answer was to eliminate the other side. He said, sit across from them. Find what you share rather than what divides you. On February 27th, that window was open. Someone closed it with bombs. And here is the most devastating part. The man who could have kept that window open, who built his entire life around exactly that kind of radical, patient humanity, was in every holy book of every nation involved in this war for 2,000 years, and nobody called him. So what would he actually do? Not in theory, practically, in 2026. He would start where he always started, with the person in front of him. Not the nation, not the ideology, the person. The Iranian soldier who has a daughter who draws pictures of flowers every morning. The American pilot who calls his mother every Sunday and is terrified but would never say it. The displaced woman walking a cold, empty road with one bag and a child's hand in hers, who had a garden last year, who made tea every afternoon, whose whole world no longer stands. He would see every single one of them, not as symbols, not as sides, as
2026.
People. And then
Iran war,
he would speak.
Most unstable
to America,
in decades.
He would say, you cannot bomb your way to peace. You never could. Power without mercy is not strength. It is just empire with better weapons, and empires always end. To Iran, he would say, resistance without forgiveness eventually becomes what it fights. Every missile fired hardens the next generation against you. The new supreme leader is angrier than his father. What comes after him? When does it stop? And who decides to be brave enough to stop it? To Israel, he would say, chosen does not mean exempt. Micah said it. Isaiah said it. He repeated it his whole life. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly, not with targeted assassinations in the middle of active diplomacy. Humbly. And to Russia and China, the watchers, the calculators, the ones crossing to the other side of the road while the world bleeds, he would simply tell his most famous story. A man is beaten and left on a road. Two respectable, powerful people walk past him. A stranger stops and helps. History always remembers which one was which. Always. 2,000 years of his words come down to three things. Every human life is sacred, not strategically valuable, sacred. Peace requires justice, not just the absence of bombs, but the presence of dignity for every people on every side, without exception. And the hardest one, Your enemy is a human being, with children, with grief, with a life as complete and irreplaceable as yours. He knew that. He lived that. He died proving it. The missiles are still flying. The war is not over. The nuclear question is still unanswered. But in every holy book of every nation fighting this war, his words are still there, unchanged, waiting. We just haven't been brave enough to try them. Not yet. Think about that, and share this with one person who needs to hear it today.